Here.
Mr. Ayula,
Here.
Mr. James,
Here.
Ms. Loza,
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Here.
Ms. Nichols Rhodes,
Here.
Mrs. Penta,
Here.
Mrs. Spinner,
Here.
Mr. Stams.
Here.
Thank you. Everyone is here. We will now have the invocation by Mrs. Spinner.
Thank you. Dear God, we ask for blessings on the people who have been called to lead our community in which we live, work, and play. Please bless our first responders and all those working on the front lines to keep our community safe and healthy. Grant us the courage and wisdom to know and to do what is right, good, and true. For all this we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And we'll now have the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll hold the flag up here. And on the count, 1, 2, 3, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which
it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all.
Thank you. Before you, you have the minutes from the November 23rd, 2020 meeting and the very brief December 7th, 2020 meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, they will stand as written. Ms. Caparillo, do we have any petitions, claims, or communications?
Yes, Mr. President. We have a notice from the Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding new permit number 5560855 to Magna Wine Boutique, Cuyahoga Falls LLC, 156 Front Street, Suite A, Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio 44221. We also have a notice from the Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding transfer permit number 1869736 to Cuyahoga Falls Creamery LLC, doing business as Pabst Creamery, first floor, 2162 Front Street, Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio 44221, from Crooked River Creamery LLC, doing business as Pabst Creamery, first floor, 2162 Front Street, Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio 44221.
Thank you. And now we'll have introduction of new ordinances and resolutions.
Temporary Ordinance A97, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with the city of Monroe Falls, Ohio, to extend the existing agreement for water services to Monroe Falls and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Garbach.
Temporary Ordinance A98, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of the city's requirements for certain materials, supplies, and equipment for use by the Electric Division during 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Garbach.
Temporary Ordinance A99, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of annual requirements of certain materials and supplies for use by the Street Department during 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Garbach.
Temporary Ordinance A100, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of annual requirements of certain materials and supplies for use by the Sanitation Division during 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Garbach.
Temporary Ordinance 101, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of the city's requirements of certain services, materials, and supplies for use by the Water and Sewer Division during 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Garbach.
Temporary Ordinance A102, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Safety or for the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase or lease of various vehicles and related equipment for use by the city and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Gorbach.
Temporary ordinance A-103, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the purchase of annual requirements of certain materials, supplies, and services for use by the Garage Division during 2021 and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Gorbach.
Temporary ordinance A-104, presented by the administration. An ordinance levying special assessments for the repair or replacement of sidewalks and drive approaches in the Sidewalk and Drive Approach Repair and Replacement District for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Gorbach.
Temporary ordinance A-105, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for disposal of municipal solid waste and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Gorbach.
Temporary ordinance A-106, presented by the administration. An ordinance providing for supplemental and/or amended appropriations of money for current operating expenses and capital expenditures of the city of Cuyahoga Falls and authorizing the transfer of appropriations within and for the various funds hereinafter set forth and declaring an emergency.
Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Gorbach.
Mr. President, I'm sorry to interrupt your meeting, but just a point of clarification. When Dana read A-104 in the title, she read year 2020 and not 2021. I don't know if that has an impact on the first reading of a piece of legislation or not, if that needs to be read in again.
Well, I guess just to be on the safe side, let's read it in again.
Was it for 2021?
Yeah.
I heard 2020.
It says 2020 on the.
For A-104?
Mine says 2021.
Let me
So does
see.
mine.
The actual ordinance says 2020.
Mine says 2020. I printed it off this morning.
The agenda says 2021, which is what I was looking at. So I apologize if I interrupted for no reason here.
Well, you may be correct because
I guess, should it be, it says 2020 throughout the ordinance. I don't know that that would be correct.
No,
That is correct.
it should be 2021. Oh, no,
okay.
wait, no,
No,
you're
it should be 2020.
right,
should be
Tony. I'm
2020.
sorry. Yes.
I know
it
we
should-
always do that one a year behind.
Okay.
Yes, that's
Very
right.
good. Okay,
Sorry.
okay. My
Okay.
apologies, Mr.
That's right.
President.
Yep, we glad we're for sure on this.
I thought the same
Yeah.
thing when I read it.
That's
We're
right.
at A-107, temporary ordinance A-107, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the replacement or adjustment of concrete sidewalks, drive approaches, and curbs at various locations in the city of Cuyahoga Falls and declaring an emergency.
Public and Industrial Improvements, Ms. Nichols Rhodes.
Temporary Resolution A-108, presented by the administration. A resolution creating for the year 2021 a sidewalk and drive approach repair or replacement district containing such streets, alleys, or public roadways within the corporate limits of the city of Cuyahoga Falls, declaring the necessity of repairing or replacing the sidewalks and drive approaches abutting on such streets, alleys, or public roadways within said corporate limits, and providing the method for levying special assessments and declaring an emergency.
Public and Industrial Improvements, Ms. Nichols Rhodes.
Temporary ordinance A-109, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Community Development to amend the Community Reinvestment Area Tax Exemption Agreement with Buckeye Sports Center, Inc. to reflect the title of land transfer to Sun Sports Properties LLC, a subsidiary to Buckeye Sports Center, Inc., and declaring an emergency.
Community Development, Mrs. Penta. And that concludes new introductions. We have no public hearings and there's no reports of any special committees. So we'll go right to the reports of council standing committees. Planning and zoning, Mr. James.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight, the Planning and Zoning Committee has one ordinance to vote on, temporary ordinance A72.
Temporary ordinance A72, presented by the administration upon recommendation of the Planning Commission. An ordinance approving a zoning map amendment for parcel 37-00221 from MU1 Rural Neighborhood Center to R5 Mixed Density Residential as more fully described and depicted herein, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, the Planning and Zoning Committee is in favor of temporary ordinance A72, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. James and a second by Mr. Miller to approve temporary ordinance A72. Are there any remarks?
No remarks, sir.
Question?
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A72, please signify by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. Motion passes unanimously, 11-0.
Wait, can you do a roll call? I think a few of you were on mute.
Oh, okay. Ms. Capriola, will you please call the roll for temporary ordinance A72?
Mr. Balthus,
Yes.
Mr. Brillhart,
Yes.
Mr. Gorbach,
Yes.
Mr. Ayula,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Ms. Loza,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Nichols Rhodes,
Yes.
Mrs. Penta,
Yes.
Mrs. Spinner,
Yes.
Mr. Stams,
Mr. Brillhart, Chairman, before I cast my vote, this is the property there north of Hidden Lakes. Am I correct, right?
Correct.
And this is to approve the new development or the construction or the go ahead of this development?
This is to approve a zoning map amendment.
Okay. I vote yes.
Okay. That's it. Okay, motion passes unanimously, 11-0.
Mr. President, that concludes my committee.
Thank you, Mr. James. Finance and appropriations, Mr. Gorbach.
Thank you, Mr. Brillhart. We have 7 pieces of legislation to vote on this evening, beginning with temporary ordinance A78.
temporary ordinance A78, presented by the administration. An ordinance establishing annual appropriations of money for the current expenses, capital expenditures, and other expenses of the city of Cuyahoga Falls and for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2021, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, the Finance Committee voted in favor of temporary ordinance A78 for a vote this evening, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We have a motion to approve temporary ordinance A78 by Mr. Gorbach with a second by Mrs. Spinner. Are there any remarks?
Yes, Mr. President, if you'll indulge me just for a couple minutes. We had some remarks during the course of the finance budget hearings, and apologize if I repeat some of those. I'll try not to. One thing I noted that this the budget ordinance this year is A78. Last year it was B79. So what that tells me, in spite of this pandemic and all the crippling issues that a lot of communities have felt, and we've felt some as well, we're still moving on. We're passing legislation at the same rate as we did last year, which is a good sign. And as we've seen as members of council, we have new projects. We have a lot of great things going on. Surprising only because it's in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm not seeing communities around us having the success that we're having during this time. So we're extremely well positioned for next year, and I'm very excited about that. One of the things we've heard a lot from Mr. Hoffman during these last 4 weeks, one of the most important things I think was we retained our bond rating, AA2 bond rating. That is just huge. There are some communities abutting ours that their bond rating was lowered, and it's devastating. We talked about how our bond interest rates and our debt rates are low because of our high bond rating, which allows our dollars to be spread further to go back to our residents in the form of capital projects and services. We stretch those dollars. We heard just last week Mr. Damasi talking about some capital projects, the high number of bidders that we're getting, which creates a more competitive environment, which allows sometimes extensions of those projects or even additional projects to be performed. That's due to timing, as he indicated last week, but also due to the fact that we're continuing to be able to keep up our maintenance, keep up capital projects. It's always cheaper to do it today than it is tomorrow. And we're able to continue doing that and maintaining the infrastructure of our community, which is just huge. Our residents will see parks being improved throughout the city. And as always, we are outfitting our police force and fire forces with updated equipment that they can rely on when they're called for help within the city and when our neighboring communities need their assistance. So it's a great time. This is a big piece of legislation, the budget, and I know we've been pouring over it for the last 4 weeks, but it is exciting. Numbers on a page aren't always exciting, but this is exciting. We're increasing the budget again for street resurfacing to now a new high of $3 million, which is it's really staggering during these times that we're able to do this. So I'd like to once again tip my hat, thank Mr. Hoffman and his team, Mr. Fitzsimmons and Mr. Novelli. And I know, Brian, you have a lot of other folks working for you. One of the treats during this budget process for me is to hear from all the different department heads, many of which we don't interact with on a daily basis. They're not before council a lot. And to see their dedication and their passion for just doing the best job they can to make this city the crown jewel it is. And it's a privilege to be on council and to be a part of it. And I would just, Mr. President, like to extend my thanks to the department heads, to the mayor, and to all of their managers and employees of the city. We appreciate it for getting us through this year, and we look forward to a real exciting year next year. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Gorbach. Excellent comments. Any other comments?
Question.
Okay, question. I'm just going to say one thing. Not only is this a great city to live in, government here really works. Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A78. Ms. Capriola, I'd like to do a roll call vote on this one because I do see some muted. All those in favor, please signify by saying yes when your name is called. All those opposed say no.
Mr. Balthus,
Yes.
Mr. Brillhart,
Yes.
Mr. Gorbach,
Yes.
Mr. Ayula,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Ms. Loza,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Nichols Rhodes,
Yes.
Mrs. Penta,
Yes.
Mrs. Spinner,
Yes.
and Mr. Stans.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, 11-0. Great work.
Seconded that motion.
What's
Did you
that?
make 'em- Did you, Ms. Spinner did? Mrs. Spinner did?
Oh,
I think
who, Mrs.
I didn't
Mr.
hear you.
Ayula second.
Mr. Gorbach second, or Mr. Gorbach made the motion, Mrs. Spinner seconded.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Temporary ordinance A87, presented by the administration, an ordinance amending ordinance 56-2018 to include JP Morgan Chase Bank NA as a depository for the active and interim funds of the city of Cuyahoga Falls and declaring an emergency.
Finance Committee voted in favor of bringing temporary ordinance A87 out for a vote this evening, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We have a motion to approve temporary ordinance A87 by Mr. Gorbach, seconded by Mr. Ayula. Are there any remarks?
I have none.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A87, please signify by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously.
Temporary ordinance A88, presented by the administration. Temporary resolution A88, presented by the administration. A resolution requesting the Summit County Fiscal Officer to make advanced distribution of tax receipts payable to the city of Cuyahoga Falls and declaring an emergency.
The Finance Committee is in favor of temporary ordinance A88 for a vote this evening, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gorbach and a second by Mrs. Spinner to approve temporary resolution A88. Are there any remarks?
I have no remarks.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary resolution A88, please signify by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. Motion passes unanimously.
Temporary ordinance A89, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contractor contracts without competitive bidding with the Vitality Group LLC for the city's wellness program services to benefits eligible employees and declaring an emergency.
Finance Committee voted in favor of temporary ordinance A89 for a vote this evening, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We have a motion to approve temporary ordinance A89 by Mr. Gorbach with a second by Mr. Ayula. Are there any remarks?
No remarks, Mr. President.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A89, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. Motion passes unanimously 11-0.
Temporary ordinance A90, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contractor contracts without competitive bidding with CVS Health and/or its subsidiary, CVS Caremark, for the administration of the city's self-insured employee prescription drug plans for a period not to exceed 3 years and declaring an emergency.
Finance Committee voted in favor of temporary ordinance A89 for a vote this evening, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
That was A90.
Yes, A90.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve temporary ordinance A90 made by Mr. Gorbach, seconded by Mrs. Spinner. Are there any remarks?
I have no remarks.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A90, please signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed, say no. Motion passes unanimously 11-0.
Temporary ordinance A91, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the director of public service to enter into a contractor contracts for the purchase of natural gas after publicly advertising for bids and declaring an emergency.
The Finance Committee voted in favor of temporary ordinance A91 for a vote this evening, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We have a motion to approve temporary ordinance A91 by Mr. Gorbach and seconded by Mr. Ayula. Are there any remarks?
I have no remarks.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A91, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. Motion passes unanimously 11-0.
Temporary ordinance A92, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the director of public service to enter into a contractor contracts with a company or companies according to law.
Ms. Caparella?
Yeah, that's,
I think we need to do temporary ordinance A96.
oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. For A96. Yes.
Yeah, we got to have Mr. Gorbach do one more.
One more. Temporary ordinance A96, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract without competitive bidding with Basic NEO for the administration of the Section 125 Flexible Spending Account Plan, Health Reimbursement Account Plan, Health Savings Account Plan, Retiree Medical Reimbursement Account Plan, and COBRA for a period not to exceed 3 years and declaring an emergency.
The Finance Committee voted in favor of temporary ordinance A96 for a vote this evening, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We have a motion to approve temporary ordinance A96 made by Mr. Gorbach, seconded by Mrs. Spinner. Are there any remarks?
I have no remarks.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A96, please signify by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. Motion passes unanimously 11-0.
That concludes the Finance Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Gorbach. Public and industrial improvements, Ms. Nichols Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have 3 items for to vote on this evening. The first one is temporary ordinance A92.
Temporary ordinance A92, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts with the company or companies according to law for the roadway improvements to Surrey Trail from Sand Run Road to the intersection west of Sand Hill Drive, and installation of water line on Sand Hill Drive, Cubic Drive, and a portion of Surrey Trail, together with necessary appurtenances, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, the Public and Industrial Improvements Committee voted in favor of bringing this A92 out for a vote of full council tonight, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Nichols Rhodes and a second by Mr. Stams to approve temporary ordinance A92. Are there any remarks?
No remarks, Mr. President.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A92, please signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously 11-0.
Temporary ordinance A93, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the Towpath Boulevard storm improvements and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President, the Public and Industrial Improvements Committee voted in favor of bringing temporary ordinance A93 out of committee tonight for a vote, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We have a motion to approve temporary ordinance A93 made by Ms. Nichols Rhodes, seconded by Mr. Ayula. Are there any remarks?
I have no remarks.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A93, please signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously 11-0.
Temporary ordinance A94, substitute dated 12/7/20. Presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts according to law for the construction of underground power lines on Pine Brook Trail to replace old direct buried electrical cables with new conduit and cables, and to replace transformer pads and declaring an emergency.
The Public and Industrial Improvements Committee voted in favor of bringing temporary ordinance A94 substitute December 7th, 2020 for a vote this evening, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We may have a motion made by Ms. Nichols Rhodes, seconded by Mr. Stams to approve temporary ordinance A94, substitute dated December 7th, 2020. Are there any remarks?
I have no remarks.
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor of temporary ordinance A94, substitute dated December 7th, 2020, please signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously 11-0.
That concludes our report for this evening, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols Rhodes. Public Affairs, Mr. Balthus.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have one piece of legislation to discuss this evening, temporary ordinance A95.
Temporary ordinance A95, presented by the administration. An ordinance authorizing the mayor as director of public safety to enter into a mobile field force multi-jurisdiction operational assistance mutual aid agreement with various political subdivisions within Summit County and declaring an emergency.
The Public Affairs Committee is in favor of temporary ordinance A95, and I move for its adoption.
Second.
We have a motion to approve temporary ordinance A95 made by Mr. Balthus, seconded by Mrs. Spinner. Are there any remarks?
I have none.
Question.
Question has been called. All those are in favor of temporary ordinance A95, please signify by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously, 11-0.
Thank you, Mr. President. That completes the Public Affairs report.
Thank you, Mr. Balthus. Community Development, Mrs. Penta.
No report, Mr. President.
Okay, that concludes reports of standing committees. And at this point, we'll go to schedule of council committee meetings. Next committee date will be December 21st, 2020. Planning and zoning, Mr. James.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next week, Monday, December 21st at 6:30, the Planning and Zoning Committee will hold a public hearing for temporary ordinance A81, followed by the committee, which will also discuss temporary ordinance A81.
Thank you. Finance and Appropriations, Mr. Gorbach.
Yes, we'll meet December 21st at 6:35.
Public and Industrial Improvements, Ms. Nichols Rhodes.
We will meet probably more like, this is a joke, probably 7:30, Mr. Finance Committee, but I'm going to say Monday, December 21st, 2020 at 6:40 p.m.
Thank you. Public Affairs, Mr. Balthus.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Public Affairs Committee is subject to call.
Thank you. Community Development, Mrs. Penta.
We're gonna say 6:45, but could be later on the 21st.
Thank you. Do we have any miscellaneous business to come before council?
Mr. Chairman, I only have one thing to add to tonight's meeting,
Okay.
and that's go Brown.
Excellent.
Move to adjourn.
Wait, real quick, I'm sorry, it's Mary. If I may, I just want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas if that's what you celebrate, Happy Hanukkah if that's what you celebrate, and just happy holidays and enjoy your families. And I hope you're only meeting with people who you live with so that we all make it through to next year. But happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you, Mary. Happy
Thank
holidays.
you. Yeah, stay healthy, everybody.
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
I think Mr. Gorbach had something to say.
No,
Yes, Mr.
I'm
Gorbach.
like 0 for 2 tonight, making remarks when I shouldn't make any, but I guess I had some miscellaneous business, but given Mr. Stam's message, my miscellaneous business was an hour and 11 minutes long, and I that may be a problem for pre-gaming.
Wait till after we adjourn, then you can. We're good. Okay, all those in favor of adjournment, please say goodbye by saying yes.
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 Any opposed? Say no.